Bom, nós vamos começar agora, nós vamos chamar para a primeira apresentação o Lukas Feireiss, que tem como tema central uma reflexão sobre os lugares da arte, espaços que nos circundam, afetam e definem. Lukas é formado em filosofia e estudos culturais. Fundou um centro interdisciplinar em Berlim, o Lukas Feireiss Studio, com foco na discussão de arquitetura, arte e cultura contemporânea na esfera urbana. Ele atua como editor e curador de diversas instituições internacionais e é membro do conselho do Aedes Network Campus, plataforma de estudos da metrópole sediada em Berlim. Lukas, please come up.
Good morning, Sao Paulo. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Thomas. Thank you to Arq.Futuro. Thank you to the Sao Paulo Biennial for inviting me to talk here at this day at the debate about performing cities, art, architecture, and public space. My name is Lukas Feireiss. I'm from Berlin. I'm an independent curator, writer, and educator. And as Thomas said, I focus on the critical discussion and the interplay of the arts, of urban creative practices. It is also my honor to be the kickoff for today, kind of to break the ground or to topically bring us all into the subject matter under the first header, creators of the urban scale. So I'll try to provide an overview that is both personal and general of the performative qualities of creative practices in the urban environment and kind of act as a starting point then for the further discussions during the course of the day. So as with all my work, theory and practice will intertwine, and I will try to keep the threshold between the two, theory and practice, as low as possible. So let's start with the title, Performing Cities, or the Performative City, or Performing the Urban, the title of my talk. What does the performative, or what does performance actually mean in the context of the city? Well, a crucial notion, or crucial notions to a performative understanding of architecture on an urban scale means that the city unfolds in situations, actually, in utilizations, in co-actions and co-creations. In short, performing cities or performing the urban is not so much about urbanity as an object, but it's about conceiving the urban as a process of performative quality. So performativity, or the performative, has been a key term in the cultural studies for actually about 20 years. It's sometimes referred to also as the performative turn, and it has influenced theoretical debate for some time. And since a couple of years, it has also entered now the architectural and the urbanistic discourse. However, the term performative, and please excuse that I give like a general introduction to the whole thing, the term performative, however, originates not from theater theory, as one might imagine, but actually from linguistic philosophy, in which John Langshaw Austin introduced a distinction between performance and the performative in his speech act theory. While performance solely delineates the execution of an operation, the performative constitutes a situation in which articulation itself generates a new reality. Say, for example, I'm a priest or I'm a municipal official and I declare the two of you as husband and wife, I create a new social reality. And this is the idea of the performative. So it's not just about saying something, but rather to perform a certain kind of action. Performativity in this context, in this understanding, is so not purely linguistic, but it's rather a social phenomena. Now, the application of the performative to the urban discussion must be read against, again, the backdrop of a number of, let's say, forethinkers in the field, such as Michel Foucault or Henri Lefebvre. Foucault already proclaimed our time as the era of space, and Lefebvre embraced a multiplicity of spaces that are socially produced and made productive in social practices. So Lefebvre understands space not as a static or given, but a continuous production of spatial relations. He thereby also strongly focuses on the contradictory, conflictual, and ultimately political character of the processes of production and reproduction of space. But on a side note, and I think that's always relevant to see and to understand, these thoughts and ideas must always be understood within their specific historical context. In this case, it's the 1960s. So it's not only a time of political change and social upheaval, but also one that in many ways redefined our understanding of space. And I'm literally speaking, not only Lefebvre and the production of space, but it's also the student revolts in the streets of Paris and across Europe. It is also the time of human space flight in zero gravity and actually man walking on the moon. So this is a completely different definition of space. And very novel spatial experiments in architecture that leave the confined boundaries of the discipline and actually situate themselves in great vicinity to artistic happenings and performances. But correlating to what Lefebvre calls l'espace vécu in his complex theory about space, the term lived space describes the active process of perception and production at the very same time. Space emerges in a process of acting between individuals, in a process of utilization of objects, in a process of everyday life. In addition, there's also a discursive thread in architecture theory that underlines the performative virtue of architecture. This special performative virtue sets architecture actually apart from all other professions. We are constantly part of the aesthetic reality of architecture, because with our own body, we are not part of the architectonic space that we are part of the architectonic space, that we produce and perceive at the same moment. In architecture, we are co-creators, participants actually. That's quite different to the visual arts, where we are spectators. In architecture, we are co-actors, we are participants. It is always a complex architectural situation we find ourselves, in which we perceive architecture and in which only then architecture emerges as such. Architecture, as Umberto Eco called it, the art of articulating space, is thereby gaining also a new relevance in urbanism. And yes, cities are dynamic spaces of change in which space is constantly articulated, negotiated, and renegotiated. Far beyond the conventions of architecture and territorial planning, cities offer a multitude of opportunities for alternative engagement. Given norms, forms, and regulation within the cityscape are commonly subverted in actually performative resistance, I might call it. It is the ordinary users and inhabitants of the city, me and you, who constantly challenge and adapt civic spatial rules and functions to their own benefit. Another important forethinker in this field, Michel de Certeau, notes in 1980 in his practice of the everyday life, the act of walking is to the urban system what expressing oneself, the act of speaking, is to language or to formulated statements. The play of steps shape the space. I repeat, the play of steps shape the space. They weave the basic structure of places. In this sense, the movements of pedestrians create one of the physical systems that constitute the core of the city, but cannot be pinpointed to any particular place or located, because they themselves create the space. So while walking through the city, we are not only experiencing these situations differently according to our individual point of view, but are also creating spaces through our play of strides. From, this has a historical long heritage, so to speak, from the detached and observant mode of spatial engagement of the flaneur, wandering through the boulevards and arcades of the late 19th century and early 20th century. Think of Proust, think of Edgar Allan Poe's Man in the Crowd, or think of Robert Musil's Man Without Qualities, Walter Benjamin's Arcades project, to the intoxicated rumbling and drifting to the city streets of the situationist dérive, to the newly emerging figure of the traceur who fluidly adapts his or her movement to any given spatial restraint while moving through the city from A to B. I believe it is such practices of urban culture that we can learn the most about the performative quality of urban space. Be it the hit-and-run modus operandi of graffiti writers who are leaving nothing but traces of a different reading of the city that contest, provoke, and sometimes blend into the cityscape. Sao Paulo is a fantastic example for that. Or skateboarding that, just like graffiti, offers a completely alternative view or use of the city that tests the boundaries of the urban environment by threatening conventional definitions of space. Skaters actually radically subvert the intended use of the city and its buildings by using its structural elements in a way neither practiced nor understood by most normal civilians. In his theoretical and practical exploration of these urban practitioners, British architectural scholar Ian Borden argues that skateboarding applies an implicit yet ongoing tendency to critique contemporary cities for their meanings and modes of operation, one that challenged both the form and political mechanics of urban life. But similar approaches can be found amongst a whole generation of urban creatives today to whom the city is not only their natural habitat, but also their main field of operation. Their own unique countercultural form of engagement with the urban realm is distinguished by a principle of creative disobedience towards accepted, dominant, spatial, and social practices. They do not accept cities as they are, but create their own space, their own architecture, their own cities. Here, for example, Wermke-Leinkauf, a duo from Berlin, became quite known for the white American flag on the Brooklyn Bridge that they installed earlier this year. And these other works where you just see them kind of walking and being one little figure in the city skyline. Or more theatrical pieces like Willy Dornier embodies an urban space that acts as a work that merges the human body within a diversified urban architectural environment. The intention here is clearly to point out the urban functional structure and to artistically uncover the restricted possibilities of movement and behavior, as well as the rules and limitations of city space. Radio Ligna, another project which is called a radio ballet, where a random crowd is kind of directed via radio messages on a pirate radio station that they listen to, and they're directed in public spaces to kind of lay on the ground or do certain dance moves. To Jordi Golomer's An Architecton, an emblematic film and photo series in the cities of Barcelona, Bucharest, Brasilia, and Osaka, who show a fictional character carrying cardboard models and replicas of real buildings. And to the changes of scale, he describes a sarcastic and kind of critical drift through these cities. Or Brad Downey's spontaneous sculptures here in Berlin, where he transformed a temporary bicycle lane and obviously confused the police quite a bit, we see on the right-hand side. Or the De Pluto Collective's humorous, thought-provoking, unsolicited messages in urban space here in St. Petersburg. The secret of happiness is... So these are a few out of many and of many and many, many more. But all of these ephemeral and anonymous artworks thereby suit the character and the rhythm of the modern metropolis that demands for constant rejuvenation and urban practice on a daily basis. By means of these urban interventions, we witness actually quite an interesting process. We witness an aestheticization of the city and a simultaneous urbanization of the arts. Or, as once again Lefebvre put it quite ingeniously, the art of living in the city as a work of art. In other words, the future of the art is not artistic, but urban. So this idea can also be traced in numerous architectural projects across the globe that play on the temporary nature of architecture. Performative architecture that is not built to last, but rather reacts to its urban environment. Call it performative urbanism, tactile urbanism, pop-up urbanism, informal and spontaneous urbanism, all names for the same idea and for the same approach. Here is the Space Buster by Raumlabor, basically pulls up in whichever corner and spontaneously creates a space. Obviously also strongly inspired by experimentations of the 1960s and 70s in architecture, just like Haus Rucker or Corp Himmelblau. Or a project here in Brazil, Topographical Amnesias, an architectural intervention which transformed a previously underutilized, quasi-underground labyrinthine pillared hall with airs of a trash dump. So here architecture, landscaping, and environmental reclaiming intermingle and work as an urban set for a theater play. They are prime examples of a changing self-perception of architecture that looks beyond the boundaries of its own discipline. The ability to overcome the confines of the prevalent passive experience of urban surroundings and actively explore the hidden potentials also opens up the prospect of discovering a world of difference for permanent architectural interventions, such as an L architect's ingenious transformation of a non-place below a highway in the Netherlands into a thriving social hub. Or the half-a-mile-long urban space wedging to one of the most ethnically diverse and socially challenged neighborhoods in Denmark by Topotec 1, Big and Superflex, which is conceived as a giant exhibition of urban best practice from 60 different nationalities of the people inhabiting the area around it. Such creative spatial practices within the urban realm at the intersection of art and architecture I have widely discussed in a number of publications over the years. Interventions in both the build as well as the natural environment that range from small to large scale, ephemeral to permanent, playful to formal, and from individual to collective actions. All of these diverse projects are conjoined in their affirmative endeavor to transform abstract spaces to concrete places. This deliberate alternation and oscillation of the former to the later can be described very simply as a process in which a particular part of our spatial environment is being activated, inhabited, and cohabited with an added value of experience and meaning through performative actions. An exercise that allows for both an individual and intimate, as well as a collective and shared appropriation of our environment and life on an aesthetic, functional, social, and political level. In this context, the words of Jane Jacobs, the Canadian writer and activist, best known for her seminal book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, still holds true for me in the discussion of public space and its societal implications. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. So vaguely following her line of thought, I have curated for 2 subsequent years a large festival on the main cultural axis of the city of Rotterdam that welcomes approximately 30,000 visitors in 3 days, that open up the country's cultural season in early autumn. For the first time that I did it, under the title Victory of the Bottom Up, I invited Dutch and European artists to actively challenge the passive experience of the urban environment and actually find locations within the city center where they want to intervene. The diverse projects realized within these days marked the tactical victory of bottom-up tactics, approaches, in comprehending and experiencing the city over functionalistic top-down strategies of traditional urban planning. Be it Bill Drummond, to some of you still known as the frontman of the KLF, actually a band that made quite some noise in the 80s and 90s, with a very simple project called Man Making Beds. So what he has devoted himself for the last couple of years is just making beds. I think this was number 12, and he aims to do 40. So over 3 days, he built a bed, and at the end, sold it in a lottery. Or Leonard von Munster, which was kind of a take on J.G. Ballard's Concrete Island and the Tower, created in the public park of Rotterdam this sculpture of a brutalist building with this little green oasis on it. Or Michael Johansson on the very right, who collected used furniture and kind of filled the gap between two museums on the Witte de Witt Street in a work called Tetris. Or the Far West Hotel by the French architecture collective Exist. What they did, they chose basically in the main city park designed by OMA, there's a little pond and a little island, more of a symbolic island, where the most some ducks kind of pass by every now and then. So they said, actually, we're going to build a bridge over there, and we're going to create a little hotel village. So in particular, with the work of Exist, the highly relational character becomes clear. It consciously activates the spectator through the artistic program and thereby transforms architecture and space into a moving dialogue. The artwork here creates a social environment in which people come together to participate in a shared activity. The common denominator in these practices is found in the link with the relational sphere. In a way, it's a one-to-one translation of the other sculpture that we saw from Leonard von Munster, the little tent against the brutalist building. French art critic Nicolas Bourriaud, who coined the term relational aesthetics, claims the role of artworks is no longer to form imaginary and utopian realities, but to actually be ways of living and models of action within the existing real, whatever scale chosen by the artist. The artist can then be more accurately viewed as the catalyst in art, rather than being at the center, and the audience as a community. A subject I further engaged with in an exhibition and accompanying book entitled Testify, the Consequences of Architecture, which are perceived for the Netherlands Architecture Institute, which literally brings the people back into the picture and actually gives them a voice, allowing the people who live in and use buildings, who live the consequences of architecture on a daily basis, to contribute to a conversation that should have been happening all along. What does that mean? It means that the project I selected, I did not only get the information from the architects, that sounds always quite convincing, but I actually interviewed all the people who live these architecture on a daily basis. When it's a school in South Africa, we talk to the secretary, or when it's a project in Thailand, we talk to the trainee. And the beautiful part of this project is that it clashed enormously between what the architect said and what the lived reality of these buildings actually showed. Environment as the sole provenance of the architect, and to attempt to interweave architecture discourse into the very fabric of society. Despite their manifold practical and conceptual differences, these projects are all united in an overall attentiveness towards the complex relationships between context and spatial intervention, and a thorough understanding of the transformational power of architecture over time. Just click through here, there's too many to go in detail. They address the numerous current adaptive systems of social, political, ecological, and economic challenges and responsibilities that we are facing today. And they create a new picture of architectural thinking that considers its own consequences and that takes our built environment across urban as well as rural landscapes as an example of how to make a problem into a concrete possibility, not only for solution, but an opportunity to highlight the complex set of factors from which the situation has risen. Or what I really like is a term by Stuart Brand, the founder of the Whole Earth Catalog. He calls it a failure by failure approach to perfection. And this is the way to go. We're going to fail all the time. We're going to make mistakes all the time. The tricky part is whether we learn from them or not. So what you see a little bit in the projects, that they range from actually build projects to completely ephemeral projects, from a skateboarding school to the project actually here in Rio, or political projects in Bogota. So this discussion, we also continue at the Aedes Network Campus in Berlin, the Metropolitan Laboratory, which was established as a physical and intellectual space focused on the inseparable interplay between the urban form and social life. It was founded in 2009 in Berlin, and as a member of the advisory board and a frequent lecturer there, we basically discuss subjects as design and politics, art and architecture, in close collaboration with major international universities and architecture foundations and practices. So, 3/4 of the way, a quick reminder again, performative urbanism, performing the city. So once again, in the social lies the intrinsic quality of the performative element of architecture in the city. The performative constitutes situations which generate new social realities. So we see Joseph Beuys here now in the back. So from a curatorial perspective, I'm explicitly inspired by the idea of the social sculpture, a concept by Joseph Beuys, an extended concept of art that strives to structure and shape society and the environment through human activity. On an urban scale, this is reflected in a site and context-sensitive approach towards addressing public sphere as a performative tool for social interaction and cultural communication. But actually, this is nothing really new. We have to be aware that our cities are, historically speaking, basically performative social sculptures. They are built upon ritual, performative, and festive experiences and sequences. Already in the third of his famous 10 books, Vitruvius objected to the close spacing of columns on Roman temples, arguing that when the people come up by the steps to give thanks, they cannot approach between the columns arm in arm, but in a single file. So this doesn't work. So this brief passage reinforces a close interaction between ancient buildings and ritual processions. And in his brilliant book, The Idea of a Town, by Joseph Reichert, first published in 1963, he critiques those professionals who have reduced the city to abstractions by adopting strictly functional criteria, by showing how rituals, myths, and festive celebrations literally shape the form of the urban environment. The shape of the city, its outer walls and gates and its public spaces and buildings were built taking into consideration a series of rituals and ceremonies. So this history of festival architecture is not only restricted to religious constructions, it also includes architectural works commissioned by rulers to celebrate and proclaim their reign. Yet a coherent history of the temporary, ephemeral, and festival architectures emerges only in the early Renaissance. And all the major architects had their experience in staging festival accords or in cities for emperors, popes, and princes across Europe. At that time, such structures became a distinct genre, an art form to be cultivated throughout Europe. This genre reached its perfection in the Baroque, when political conditions were most favorable. What stands out about these architectures to me is their public aspect and their power to generate spatial imagination in the urban realm. Throughout history, they were all too often used as political tools in the service of ruling elites, but also against them. The later, we are increasingly witnessing in an interesting recurrence of the ephemeral within the urban discourse, namely the epochal unfolding of a worldwide wave of political movements that temporarily occupy existing urban spaces. Think of Sao Paulo just a year ago. So this is an urban protest movement that is both global and local at the same time. So the city here truly emerges, as there was the slide before, sociologist Saskia Sassen says, as a strategic site for understanding some of the major new trends reconfiguring the social order. The city and the metropolitan region, she continues, are one of the locations where major macro and global trends, even when not urban, materialize. It is then a space that can give us knowledge about developments that are not urban per se. She further argues, in the theoretical foreline of Lefebvre's sense of the production of space, that the street is a space where new forms of the social and the political can be made, rather than a space for simply enacting ritualized routines. So this notion has been the topical inspiration for my second turn as a curator of the Witte de Wit Festival in Rotterdam in 2012. Under the title The Street, Life Issue, my curatorial emphasis rested on the notion of the street and aimed to highlight the role and position of the street in contemporary political discourse through creative participatory processes. It thereby not only considered the street as a space of encounter and as an alternative site of artistic creation and cultural production, but foremost conceived the street as a highly social and political space, bringing in quotes actually from throughout history about the city, about urban space, about the street. So it followed like an approach that goes for all of my work, which I call edutainment. So it's somewhere between entertainment and education. For this one, I invited, not like the one before, 20 different artists, but I invited actually only 2 collectives, one of them being Raumlabor. And what we did for this one, we closed the main street off for the course of 3 days, got rid of all the cars, and we created a limousine service, creating these kind of cars that were built in the weeks before that now parked all over that street and that could be used as social sculptures. So the festival addressed the street as an integral element of social cultural interaction within the urban environment that is shared between all sorts of people. Rather than to understand the street as a monofunctional place, or to understand the street from a monofunctional perspective, the festival reimagined the street as an ever-changing, altered state within the fabric of the city. Here was the Papamobile as well, that was used actually then over the course of the days as the tool for the so-called street talks inspired by the Hyde Park, by the Speakers' Corner. So I invited quite an illustrious group of speakers, practitioners, and theorists who went up on the Papamobile and gave a spontaneous talk on various subjects dealing with the city, the street as a political space, an artistic space, a space of mobility, etc., and always creating spontaneous mobs. So it was a situation that none of them ever experienced before. Like there was no audience like you are, but it was just on the street and they were talking. So focusing on the performative and participatory processes, a lot of workshops we did as well, more with architecture students as well with kids happening through these 3 days. Some of the, or most of these social sculptures cars were used or could be used in many different ways. So focusing on the performative and participatory processes in the urban context is a great tool, but it suggests by no means that successful city planning should be based solely on participatory design processes. Perish the thought immediately, as anyone would subscribe willingly who has partaken in seemingly open but all too often tenacious decision-making processes of this kind. What it reminds us of here, however, is not only that all space is social, and that it involves assigning more or less appropriated places to social relations, but also that urban planning, which rejects the human beings living in the city, in all their inherent complexity, beauty, and chaos, would never succeed, because it would fundamentally reject the city in its very being. So every city strives from this diversity. It needs consensus as much as it needs conflict as its enabling forces. This interaction of different levels may be symbiotic or may be conflictual, but exactly this multiple constitution is essential for the ultimate survival of the city. Today, urban planners, architects, and other creatives alike therefore do not need to think and act in oppositional terms when engaging with the design of the city, but can learn from one another critically and wholeheartedly. The very concepts of public space, democracy, and citizenship are ultimately redefined by us, by the people, through lived experience. Some will succeed, others fail in the process, but in the end, it is the people who apply meaning to public space, whatever and wherever it may be. Or In the famous words of the ingenious Cedric Price, a building is not always the best solution to a spatial problem. Thank you very much for your attention.
Lucas, obrigado aí pela curiosa e provocadora apresentação. Eu queria lembrar a todos que as perguntas podem ser feitas por escrito e serão recolhidas e a gente encaminhará aqui para o Lucas. Lucas, nós no primeiro Arq.Futuro desse ano, que nós discutimos arte e cidade, foi um debate entre o escultor Richard Serra e o jornalista Michael Kielman. E com uma série de provocações do Michael Kielman em relação ao Richard Serra, e particularmente discutindo a questão jurídica que ele acabou tendo com a cidade de Nova York, e que acabou até culminando que ele perdeu, porque foi uma escultura dele que foi instalada num espaço público e que foi retirada, né? Ela atrapalhava a caminhada diária de um juiz a caminho da corte, porque era uma escultura que tinha uma intervenção muito forte no espaço urbano. A escultura foi retirada, o Richard Serra perdeu, mas ele criou o conceito de site specific, quer dizer, então a criação de obra de arte para ser incorporada a um espaço público, né? Então isso trouxe, quer dizer, e na outra ponta nós estamos discutindo aqui na sua apresentação, quer dizer, esses pop arts ou esses spontaneous mob, como você chamou, quer dizer, que provocam a cidade ou que provocam os cidadãos a olhar o espaço público de outra maneira. E temos na outra ponta um exemplo de Copenhague, que contratou, né, a prefeitura chamou um grupo de parkour para fazer uma releitura da cidade, ou uma leitura da cidade, e acabou criando um espaço, uma praça, a partir da ótica do parkour. E nós aqui em São Paulo estamos vivendo aqui também uma experiência muito recente, que é a Praça Roosevelt, que é uma praça que, de certa forma, está sendo, não diria adaptada, ela está sendo modelada pelos skatistas ou pela prática do skateboard. Eu perguntei o seguinte, quer dizer, qual a influência efetiva, ou qual deveria ser e qual poderia ser, desse tipo de manifestação, né, na atividade do gestor público? Quer dizer, como o gestor público pode incorporar isso, de fato, numa rotina de planejamento da cidade? Quer dizer, isso que eu acho que é o ponto, sendo de uma maneira muito pragmática, entrando numa questão muito de transformação, o que endereça muito aqui ao Brasil em particular, né, porque nós estamos vivendo em cidades em processo de transformação muito acelerado e com a sensação que não há devida reflexão do espaço público. Então, como o gestor público deveria incorporar essa dinâmica ou essa possibilidade no planejamento e no desenho da cidade?
If I understood the question sorry, no, I don't want to hear myself. If I understood the question correctly, the question you're asking is in how far, basically I showed all the small-scale projects. No, we will speak about cultural intervention in cultural institutions in the next round, which are working on a much bigger scale. But the question is, how can such small, spontaneous interventions be integrated in urban planning process? I think the beauty of it is that it can't really be, because, I'm sorry, could you hear the first part, or should I repeat? No? Repeat? Okay, sorry. No, I just repeated the question. How can such spontaneous interventions kind of be accepted or incorporated in the urban planning process? And I think in a beautiful way, they can't, because they're just happening. This is nothing that you can, in that sense, conceive. It is important for anyone who deals with the city to understand that cities develop and they have a very own rhythm, and in particular those that use it on an everyday level, on everyday basis, without any planning ambitions, are the ones that we can learn the most from. And I think that's something maybe that I'm trying to say also in my presentation, that I think we have to sharpen our eyes for those who use city in a creative way on a daily basis. There's so much to learn from them, but you cannot fully incorporate it, because that's the beauty of creativity in urban processes, that things just happen. And they always be adapted in a different way than you're planning.
Nessa linha do que você disse, tem uma pergunta do Benjamin, na Bienal, que ele diz qual é o papel do especialista arquiteto, urbanista, na construção desses espaços.
Well, first and foremost, I have to say I am not an architect. Yeah, I'm addicted to the subject of architecture and urban space, but I'm not an architect. By training, I'm a philosopher. So what can the expert do? How can he interact there? And again, it's a question of learning to see your city. I think that's the main part, kind of to see the possibilities there and try to help it. I mean, the beauty of the discipline of architecture, which I as a non-architect see, is that you are so closely related to all other disciplines. Like every move you make as an architect impacts socially and politically. So anything you do, even if it's just an aesthetic, it's always political. So long answer to a short question. I think kind of what can the expert do? Be aware of the political power that he has as an architect and use the interconnections that the discipline of architecture has with the social studies, with the cultural studies, with the engineering, with everything, and use that in its full power.
Quer dizer, de certa forma, fazendo uma comparação, inclusive você usou ali como exemplo, quer dizer, a Janet Jacobs, ela é de fato, também não era arquiteta, ela foi de fato a grande pensadora e talvez transformadora, porque ela partiu de uma ação política, né, na transformação das cidades, né, na sua famosa briga com o Moses em Nova York. Ela disse que a cidade não pode ser uma cidade pensada para os carros, mas uma cidade pensada para as pessoas, e que acabou dizendo que a ocupação das cidades, a ocupação das ruas era a melhor maneira de formar a cidade. De alguma maneira, a gente pode dizer que esses pop-ups ou essas intervenções de guerrilha temporárias são uma evolução do pensamento da Janet Jacobs, quer dizer, uma nova forma de ocupar as ruas ou de provocar um olhar para as ruas dentro do novo contexto de construção do espaço público?
Sorry, what's the question? Maybe the translation was wrong.
O que eu pergunto se os mobs temporários, quer dizer, as intervenções de guerrilha, essas intervenções políticas, seria uma evolução do pensamento da Janet Jacobs, quer dizer, que naquele momento ela lutou contra as estruturas viárias, né? Quer dizer, a interrupção, a brutalização da cidade. Ela diz que a cidade tem que ser humana e vivida pelas pessoas. Então, a ocupação das ruas. Podemos dizer que as intervenções urbanas seriam uma evolução do pensamento da Janet Jacobs, adequada, ou enfim, resultantes do novo contexto urbano das cidades no mundo?
Yes, or even before, I believe. If you think of what I showed briefly in the bit. Sorry, guys. I hope it's not too straining for you guys, but we're getting used to technology. I think, yes, sure, they're unknown. The heritage might be there, and they're unconsciously following in these line of thoughts. But like the idea that the city is the people is an old one. That's already Plato and the polis. So that's nothing that has been invented by Jane Jacobs. And if you think of the historical context in which I tried to present Lefebvre and the spatial revolution happening in the 1960s, that's already there. If you think of the first writings of Lefebvre were like institutional, so to speak, for the situationists, and then they became very important for the student revolts in Paris in the late 1960s. So I mean that's the beauty of discussing such subjects, that there's always connections between things. Often they are very unconsciously happening, maybe over generations later, without really knowing, but they're still happening. We actually, Pedro, on the car back from your dinner yesterday, we talked about there's always history repeating or translation of thoughts, maybe a generation later, that kind of activate or bring it into life again. So, but I said it can be very conscious or completely unconsciously happening.
And qual seria, então, dentro dessa ilusão, e sendo que a gente está discutindo essa participação, quer dizer, da cultura na transformação das cidades, Qual seria o papel das instituições culturais hoje, né? Quer dizer, nós tivemos as instituições sempre se fechando como marcos, né, de referência cultural, como produção de conhecimento de acervo, mas, de alguma maneira, pouco conectadas com as cidades, né? Nós estamos hoje, como eu disse aqui no início, vivendo uma Bienal, ou encerrando uma Bienal, que trouxe na sua concepção primária o pensamento do espaço público. Quer dizer, a Bienal foi desenvolvida, quer dizer, todo o projeto ele é pensado a partir do conceito de espaço público. Então, a abertura da Bienal, a recuperação do projeto original do Niemeyer, que era um espaço aberto, e o próprio, enfim, o próprio objeto e direção curatorial da Bienal, que a leva a pensar a street art, quer dizer, a arte comunitária, a arte pública. Qual é o papel das instituições nesse tipo de iniciativa? Vamos dizer, menos num aspecto político e de transformação urbana.
I suppose this will be a major topic for the next two panelists here as well. As I presented more the small scale, we go to the larger scale in the next two presentations. I think there's a few things that come to mind. On the one hand, you just spoke of the Biennale. That's an interesting example because it's an institutionalized exhibition, yet it's a temporary one. So this one has quite a different potential than in an established institution as a museum. Yeah, and what we also know, so the Biennale can actually interact, it go into the city, it is there for the course of 3, 4, 5, 6 months maximum, and can catch people in a completely different way. It's much more flexible than an institution that is kind of set, that is static within the city. But also there are completely different examples that we know of. Some work fantastically, others don't. No, we will have the Tate and we have the MoMA as the next examples. So there's quite a gap in when it works and when it doesn't work. What, however, I guess is important for also the, let's say, the static institutions, because at the end of the day, also Tate or MoMA or whatever remains a container. Yeah. But the program is the key to kind of filling these places in close relationship to the city and the citizens. So the programming of such places is very, very important. Also the way actually these spaces open up to the city. So again, the answer to this one really very, very, very diverse. It depends really from project to project. I believe the temporary interventions, such as the biennales, they have a great possibility and advantage to the settled institutions. But I think the interest is there, and what do you realize here? I mean, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, it's a full auditorium. People are generally interested. It's not that there's a disinterest. In particular, the young people, and in particular, we're talking about architecture and art, there's a great interest. People are coming. So this is something we should strive for, to also give them this opportunity to provide platforms for those.
Nessa linha, nós temos uma pergunta aqui do Gustavo, da USP. Ele diz: como criar mecanismos para democratizar as intervenções no espaço urbano?
Come again, how to mechanize? Simply by doing it, number one. You can start on a very small scale, I would say. Might fail in this one, might not. It is also naturally with these things, I mean, you have great ideas, you can be a great artist or a great architect. If you don't have a proper client, nothing's going to happen. Actually, I saw earlier that, absolutely, I'm so sorry. You guys are going to struggle with me here. But I'm enjoying it. No, Tom Main once told me, actually, you know what? Like, architecture and the architect is completely overrated. Like, what really cares is a proper client. Like, a good client makes a good project. So this is for the city planners amongst you. You have to be good clients. Like, then things can happen. But on the smaller scale, it's really also just by doing it. And we spoke about this earlier. To work in public space, to use the public sphere, is nothing that you just can do. You have to also kind of educate yourself in a way. You have to fail a couple of times. It's really different from culture to culture. Some cultures are just, you know, they go out, they go and every cause and they protest and they use the street. Benjamin, we talked about it yesterday. The French, they go out at any cause, no? They are on the street within a blink. I don't know how it is here. I think these kind of manifestations that you had in Sao Paulo last year were exceptional in that sense. So this is different from culture to culture, from country to country, from city to city, but it's something that can really be, you can learn quite a bit. Yeah.
Ainda dentro dessa... you're saying in Portuguese? Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem. Ainda dentro dessa linha, quer dizer, explorando um pouco só o conceito de cidadania, de fato, o que a gente identifica no Brasil, a Lídia comentou isso muito bem na apresentação dela, quer dizer, a ausência do debate das ideias, talvez por uma democracia recente, enfim, todo um histórico que a gente teve dessa, enfim, eclipse da participação da sociedade na discussão das decisões públicas, né? E esse é um processo em transformação. A gente, particularmente, no Arq.Futuro, tem batalhado muito por isso. Quer dizer, a gente entende que essa participação da sociedade civil na transformação do espaço público ela é essencial. Quer dizer, ela não há nenhum projeto que se perpetue, que se legitime, que não haja, de fato, uma participação de poder público, sociedade civil e iniciativa privada. Acho que essa é uma composição moderna de cidade. Você vem de uma cidade que tem um nível de maturidade, ou de um país que tem um nível de maturidade de cidadania muito avançado, né? E particularmente Berlim, que é uma cidade que passou por uma transformação brutal e com um projeto de integração muito complexo, né, de um país dividido, com diferenças culturais, políticas e econômicas muito profundas. E eu queria deixar qual é a participação, ou qual foi a participação dos cidadãos nessa transformação urbana e qual é a participação deles nesse tipo de guerrilha urbana, nesse tipo de ocupação do espaço público que provoca, quer dizer, que a ideia é gerar uma conscientização. Quer dizer, qual é esse papel?
Big question. Yes, they did naturally. Berlin, for those of you who know or have been there, is an exceptional case study and can really be used as like the Berlin model. And as you said, Berlin has quite some history. No, it's a history of a thriving city, one of the biggest metropolis in the world at the beginning of last century. Then a city that went through 2 world wars, political revolutions. A city that was completely bombed to the ground, where it was literally nothing but rubble and ruins. Then the separation of the city in 2 halves, they were separated by the wall in completely 2 different political systems, then kind of them moving back together. So this, like, we went through everything that a city can go through in 100 years. It's ridiculous what the city went through. And also with the break of the wall, then, as you said before, suddenly having 2 splits, a city split, that went through 50, 40 years of a completely different economic, political, social development. So, that the wall came down was thanks to the people. That was the people's revolution. That is something that we also have to keep in mind, and where we have the 25 years since the Berlin Wall fell this year. And with all the revolutions that we see going on across the world, I come to understand how special it was that this has happened without any violence. This was a people's revolution that happened without violence, and it worked. And it's a struggle, obviously, and the East is, economically speaking, still far behind, and you have to pay a solidarity bonus to the East, but from the West perspective. But the fact that this happened without violence is extraordinary. So, pre-context to the answer to your question. It's a particular type of city. And the amazing thing was with Berlin, I was basically a teenager when the wall came down, that overnight the city doubled. The footprint doubled, and the eastern part was very much underdeveloped. The western part, it was a very libertine place at the time as well, very kind of alternative in its thinking, old West Berlin, because it diverged from the rest of Germany. But the eastern part was so much unused space, because there was no economy as such around. So people could really explore the other half of the city, and it was mainly the eastern half that became the playground, the urban playground for many creatives, to find so many unused spaces. There was so many spaces. We call the spaces of uncertainty, and that's another important aspect. Uncertainty is key to the survival of a city. If everything is fixed, if everything is certain, it's over. We're done. So, and this is the very positive vibe that Berlin always had. This is this uncertainty that people could use, that they could actually see, there's an empty plot, I might as well try something there until someone comes and tells you, you should go. So this is something that people really used, that people really kind of appreciated and took in. Something, however, that's constantly changing, and something that is at the very moment changing too. So Berlin has provided that space, that freedom for now decades, but, and I'm a natural-born Berliner, we're on the verge of losing it. We might become a Finnish city too within the next 5 years. So you have to keep attentive to these things, no? And I said in my talk, you need conflict and consensus, both important. You need the certainties and the uncertainties.
Então, nós vamos para a última pergunta. Eu acho que esse ponto, particularmente, nós estivemos conversando antes, e essa preocupação, quer dizer, a gente olha para Berlim, sem dúvida nenhuma, é uma referência de uma cidade de desenvolvimento urbano, uma cidade que vem consolidando uma fratura, né, social, econômica e política muito dura, né, com esses desníveis muito similar às nossas capitais no Brasil, que fizemos isso de uma outra forma, mas essa fratura existe e a gente está tentando ver como fazer cidades. Eu acho muito importante, eu lembro que eu fui em Berlim há 3 anos atrás e fiz uma visita com um arquiteto e ele me dizia, nós temos aqui uma sobreoferta de moradia em Berlim, nós planejamos a cidade, cresceu, mas ela não cresceu como a gente esperava. Então, nós temos uma sobreoferta de 50 mil unidades de habitação. Quer dizer, nós temos aqui hoje em São Paulo uma suboferta, né? Uma demanda por 1 milhão de habitação, de unidades de habitação, vamos chamar sociais, que é o nome que se chama. Mas, ao mesmo tempo, quer dizer, a preocupação numa cidade que está num estágio de desenvolvimento muito maduro, o cuidado, né? Ele dizia isso, para eles estão preocupados já que Berlim não está caminhando bem. Então, é importante também entender, quer dizer, que não há solução mágica, você atinge um ponto, mas é um processo contínuo de evolução e desenvolvimento. Eu estou aqui com várias perguntas, infelizmente não vou conseguir fazê-las, vou fazer a última para a gente encerrar e dar a sequência, mas eu depois encaminharei, se elas estiverem com e-mail, para o Lucas. Uma pergunta aqui sem nome, sem autor, mas diz o seguinte: muitas intervenções espaciais acabam se assemelhando à linguagem publicitária ou a estratégias de marketing. Por quê?
A good one. Actually, you have to understand, I think, if we think of like the whole development of street art or graffiti art or such things, and good reading there is Cool Killer, no? The book, is that they developed as a reaction, as a cynical reaction to such brandings, to commercials in the city. So there is an intrinsic relationship between the two, that they're using like the tools of the enemy, so to speak, to intervene. But that's on the one hand, so this has a long history. If you think of the early development of graffiti in the 1980s in New York, this is definitely the anonymous that suddenly become a name, that they get a title, and they can put it against all the big Coca-Cola advertisements or such. I mean, Sao Paulo has a special relationship to the commercials, no, in the city and such. Quite an impressive move, by the way. I really like it. But yes, sure, there are relations, and I think it's a very conscious and translation of similar strategies in a more subversive way, though.
Eu não resisto, tem uma pergunta aqui muito boa, the last one, but, que vai nessa linha assim. O Richard Serra, no Arq.Futuro, ele disse que ele prefere ver uma má escultura em espaço público que nenhuma escultura, pelo poder provocador e educador que a arte tem. A pergunta é, você acredita que a arte em espaço público tem a mesma força provocadora que essas ocupações ou essas performances?
Well, it really, really depends on the artist you're talking about. No? There's incredibly boring sculptures in public space. Some are beautiful, and some can also be, reinterpreted, and that's where the key lies. But I try to avoid a general answer on that one. Yeah.
Okay, I could understand. Tá ótimo. Lucas, thank you so much.
Thank you very much
for being here with us.